some of our laboratories. This is not well known, of course, but the fact remains that it is there. And when we think about terrorism, we think of deliberate acts. But in many cases, there are accidental incidents that may result in mass destruction, or mass casualty event. There's that. So when I see legislation like this that strengthens the resilience of Barbados and the Caribbean, because of the interconnectivity, when we strengthen our resilience here, it redounds to the benefit of countries across the region. Because one of the things I discovered at the conference was that whereas we may have a policy, or we're working on a policy to examine and to prevent the proliferation of these weapons, many of our regional brothers and sisters, based on the conversations that we would have had, this does not even it doesn't factor into their reality. They don't have a clue, some of them. It's not up for discussion. It has never been discussed. The whole notion of these weapons of mass destruction, of terrorist infiltration, is not a factor, is not a national discussion, or a national issue, sorry. We live in a Caribbean where, yes, we are a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to some of these things, but we live in a space where there's no concern at all for these matters. We talk about a CBRN policy, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear energy policy that would look at how we would approach, or how we would respond to a threat of that nature within Barbados. And we discussed that at a meeting, and nobody that sat around the table with us, barring Trinidad, had a clue that there was such a thing, or that there was such a need. There was a need for such a policy to put in place in the event of an event, of a chemical event, or event of mass destruction or mass casualty. So I said all that to say this: when I see this government putting measures in place to put us in a position that we can respond, to such acts, I have to applaud them, because this policy was bandied about for years now. I spoke to persons that said they came here and they gave the advice, they gave us the instructions, and these things, cabinet papers, was filed away for years. Nothing was done about it. No measures were put in place. No action was taken to ensure that Barbados is in a position to respond to any kind of terrorist threat. For years. I was fortunate. I read an article. The now Minister of the Environment said that we're gonna work on this, because we see the importance of having such legislation in place before these things happen. We cannot believe that because we don't do anybody anything that we would not become a target. We would not want to be considered a soft target, but the reality is that we are a soft target. And persons, for whatever reasons, may want to target Barbados, and we have to believe that those persons exist. And I know that the leader of government business alluded to the fact that we may have certain cells right here in the Caribbean. She didn't call a country, but I wouldn't call it country, but I will tell you this. There's a list of at least 135 persons who would have gone to Syria, who would have gone to the Middle East, who would have fought with ISIS, and who are back in the Caribbean now. 135 persons who have training, military training, and a particular ideology that is skewed towards terrorism. 136. But we have a large number, and they're not that far away. Which brings me back to the original point of money laundering. It's not so far-fetched to believe that persons who are living in that other jurisdiction could be in direct contact, or there might be a nexus between persons there and persons here. So we have to put these preventive measures in place to ensure that there cannot be a financing. Maybe Trinidad may be spotlight maybe on another territory, but because Barbados is not known for such activities, you may think Barbados might be an easier source to get that finance out. So that's why it is important, again, that such measures be put in place so that we can root out these things and ensure that persons here, whether it is intentional or unintentional, do not engage in any measures that would anyhow spirit ahead or would support any kind of terrorist activity, whether it's terrorist activity in the north or in the Middle East. We do not want to support any kind of terrorist activity. And yes, we may think that these persons are so far removed from our everyday existence that we should not even be bothered. But reality is that everything is so interconnected. I saw just this morning, I saw there are persons from Russia training people in Central African Republic. People, the globe is interconnected. Something that happens here in Barbados might have a direct impact on something that happened in Syria or in parts of Eastern Africa or in northern part of Nigeria, and it may have a direct impact on us here in Barbados again. So that's how it works. We cannot get away from it. We cannot get around it. So I say all that to say that it's important that we, even though we don't see terrorism in our faces like most countries, we have to be aware that there are these non-state actors that would be willing at the drop of a dime to commit an act. And they are all around us. There's no particular religion. No. Some years ago, the focus in North America was on Islamic terrorism. Now, you don't even hear the term anymore. You talk about domestic terrorism now in the States. You talk about white supremacists. You know, that's what they're talking about in the States now. That's the type of terrorism that they're faced with. And 3 or 4 years ago, it was only term being bandied around was Islamic terrorism, because that was what was most prevalent at the time, right? But the reality is that anybody could become a terrorist for whatever cause. They are strong enough to want to lay down their life or destroy somebody else's life or somebody else's way of life for. And that is a reality. So as I said, we do not want to create any situation where Barbados or persons within Barbados can support or would support, either intentionally or unintentionally, any terrorist act. Which brings me to an important component within the anti-terrorism bill, which looks at the designation of the terrorist designation on a person. Obviously, if a person is investigated and discovered or found to be somehow linked to terrorist act, whether it be through financing or direct participation within the act, or where they would have gone overseas and trained with a cell, or would have gone overseas and fought in one of the conflicts that are ongoing, that person is designated a terrorist. What is, I think, interesting about this piece of legislation, that it provides recourse for persons such as that. And a person may be designated without, in some cases, a person might have been designated, but at one point in their life, they were able to prove that, in fact, they were not involved intentionally or otherwise in any act. This legislation allows for that person to redeem them, to redeem themselves. There's some redemption for a person like that. If you are designated a terrorist, it does not mean that you're going to be labeled a terrorist for your entire life. If it can be proven that, in fact, you were not involved in any act. And reality is that everyday persons are misrepresented, persons are accused, in some cases wrongfully, for things that that they did not do, and they have the opportunity to redeem themselves. And terrorism is a very sensitive area. It's very sensitive. Persons get very emotional when they think about terrorist acts. And that emotion sometimes may lead persons to say things or do things that when you had a chance to sit down and be rational and think it over, you might have been a bit hasty. So I believe it's important that persons get that opportunity to redeem themselves, to prove themselves that they are in fact legit and straight persons who have the best interests of this country at heart and would not in any way seek to destroy the lives of Barbadians or the real life of Barbadians and destroy the reputation of Barbados, because believe me, if we ever have a terrorist event here, it can devastate our economy. It can devastate the economy of Barbados and devastate the economies of some of the neighboring territories. And that's the reality. It's not just the loss of life, which would be horrible, but the devastating effect it can have on the Barbadian economy and the economy of many of the countries within CARICOM. So as I wrap up, I just wanted to put out there that we are all living in a global community. We are all connected. What impacts one part of the world is going to have some impact on us. B, we have to be more resilient and proactive when it comes to such matters as terrorism. And C, I want to applaud again the government in being forward-leaning in terms of having the legislative framework in place to ensure that Barbados is compliant with its international partners, that Barbados is in a position to respond to any act of terrorism. Barbados is in a position to prevent, in many cases, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In whatever limited capacity we may have, we are in a position to do what we have to do to ensure that these weapons do not, or monies to finance these weapons do not pass through this country, to put it simply. So with those few words, Mr. President, I just want to once again throw my full support behind this legislation and just say that I also want to support the views of the senators who spoke before me, because we all understand that this legislation augurs well for Barbados, augurs well for the region, and what it does is, in fact, ensure the security of this country and the security of all of us. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you, Senator Springer. I next recognize Senator Rudy Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy today to be able to support these two bills before this honorable chamber. I believe, sir, that these bills are extremely important given the type of global environment in which we exist. As I listen to the acting leader of government business reflect on the first terrorist attack that she was aware of, and I remember well, sir, the Cubana crash. At that time, sir, I was 11 years old, and I remember hearing the different comments. It also made me reflect, yes, I'm dating myself, Mr. President. I have a friend who says that at 54, we are in our young old age. So I'm not, yes, I can let everyone know. Sir, I'm hearing people in the chamber saying that I look as if I'm 35. So I do accept that compliment. Yes. So I accept that compliment. But I remember hearing, sir, of a man whose intention was to change the political environment of Barbados, and whose desire was to come to Barbados even if he had to come, I heard, on the back of a dolphin, in order to use whatever terrorist influence that he may have to change the democratic course of governance in Barbados. And I say that, sir, because, and I think other honorable senators have borne out this point, that we are not immune to terrorism. While we would like to think that we exist in a safe and secure environment, the reality is that there are all types of people in this world, and there are all types of people in Barbados. And very often, when we assess and evaluate matters, we do so based on our own experiences, our own socio-economic standing. We do so with respect to our own rational thoughts, and we do so with respect to logic and reasoning. But there are those persons, Mr. President, who do not think in that kind of way. It therefore is extremely important that government takes the necessary steps to safeguard against terrorism. So I'm extremely happy today that these bills are before this chamber, because I think that the bills signal the seriousness which the government of Barbados has in relation to dealing with all matters inclusive of terrorism. I also want to make the point, sir, at the very outset, that those involved in terrorism are not necessarily from any specific grouping. They're not from depressed areas. They're not those who have not had the exposure to learning institutions. If we reflect on what has happened globally, sometimes people from middle class and the upper class are also involved in terrorist activities. And it signals, Mr. President, that there is an obvious disenchantment, there's an obvious dislike by certain individuals with respect to the direction in which a country or a state has been moving. And I'm reflecting on that because I see here in Barbados, and I want to make the point that there's certainly, from my perspective and by my understanding, no domestic terrorism. But I do see, Mr. President, in our society, some issues which we have to seriously address. And I remember as a little boy, and in this chamber I will constantly make reference to growing up, because Mr. President, I had a wonderful childhood. I had a childhood where I pitched marbles, a childhood where I played cops and robbers, a childhood where I played that. A childhood where I played Take Me To. A really exciting childhood. A childhood, Mr. President, where I made rollers. And it was exciting, but at the same time, Mr. President, every single Sunday, I had to go to church. I had to go to church, and I had to go to Sunday school. And you know, when I reflect on Barbados of yesteryear, no matter where you lived, no matter who you were required on Sundays or Saturdays to go to church. And sir, what that did for me was that created, I don't know if one would reflect on it as a conscience, but that created for me a voice in my head in relation to right and wrong. And I think that we need, in a very serious way, to ensure that we are able to instill in our young people good and solid values. And I believe that the church has a very important role to play in that regard. And I think as well, Mr. President, that when we reflect on the violence that is taking place in the country, we do have, all of us, to ensure that we play our part, that we do what is necessary to help to create a more wholesome environment. And you know, there have been positions put, initiatives that are being undertaken by the government, and the area of Needham's Point development, going straight down to the Carlisle Bay area, is an area that government has earmarked for hotel development. But at the same time, the Prime Minister has stated very clearly that there also has to be development for the communities in the area. And that is critical, because I believe that the issues of terrorism, in part, have to do and relate to people believing that they are being disenfranchised, and believing that they do not have a voice, and that they do not have a say, and that they are not included in the process. And we therefore have to ensure that we are constantly engaging in activities to create a more wholesome society. I believe, sir, that that is vitally important, and I want to commend the government in terms of the measures that they're looking to institute with respect to the development and of the tourism sector and the expansion of tourism, but at the same time to ensure that communities are also being brought along. The issue of terrorism is one, of course, that the Customs Department, in terms of border security, has a responsibility to pay some emphasis on. And you know, when you speak of terrorist acts, and I was looking online with respect to different terrorist activities, and one of the first identified in the USA related to the assassination of President Lincoln. When we think of terrorism, you're using some kind of weapon, whether it be a gun, whether you're using some poisonous substance, whether you're using a bomb. And I think it is important for us, with respect to the amendments to this, in these bills, to ensure that we are enhancing our border security. And I know that Senator Cummings would have previously spoken in a previous debate to the issue, and I would have also made reference as well in a previous debate to the issue of the X-ray equipment that is going to be instituted at the Barbados port. And while the amendments with respect to the different bills are being made, to the different acts, Mr. President, are being made, at the same time, we have to take those actions which are able to safeguard our borders. The fact that we would have seen a proliferation of firearms, we would have seen a number of violent crimes taking place. The question has always been, where are those guns and the ammunition coming from? And it has been, sir, due to the fact that they're coming into Barbados, because none of those are manufactured here, so they're coming into Barbados. And I think it is a positive thing that the government is ensuring that it is able to facilitate border protection. Sir, as I speak to the issue of customs, I just want to maybe just divert a little bit in relation to customs, because there is a concern that I have, and that concern relates, sir, to a tourism-related matter. And I'm speaking on it with respect to this amendment because it's a customs amendment. There's a situation, sir, where a number of tourism enterprises are given under various pieces of legislation, whether that be the Tourism Development Act, the Tourism Development Amendment Act, Cap 67B, provisions for the waiver of taxes and duties. And many of these tourism enterprises, as members of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, inform, sir, of their frustration. I've said in this chamber before a situation where a member reported that the Minister of Tourism wrote on his letterhead indicating under the Tourism Development Amendment Act the waiver of taxes and duties for a particular entity. And the member reported to me that when it went to customs, the customs officer indicated that the letter should not be on the letterhead of the minister. It should be on the letterhead of the ministry. And the act, sir, the act makes reference to the Minister of Tourism. I'm referencing this, sir, because, you know, we have to try and see how we could assist people in being able to achieve the benefits which the government has determined by policy. And we have a situation where, depending on the customs officer that you go to today or you go to tomorrow, the interpretation is a lot different. And I want, sir, to use this time in this debate to make an appeal to customs in terms of the manner in which they go about instituting the waiver of taxes and duties for tourism enterprises that apply. And I'm saying to you, sir, that it simply cannot be left to the discretion of a customs officer to determine whether or not the provisions provided by way of the legislation should be facilitated. As far as I know, sir, as far as I know, there has been discussions over the years as to whether law is made by Parliament or law is made by judges. That has been over the years some discussion. I have never, however, sir, heard that there has ever been any discussion about law being made by any entity such as customs. And therefore, customs has the responsibility to follow the law and has the responsibility to institute it in the manner in which they did. Now that I've said that, sir, and you have allowed me to divert a little bit as I speak to customs, and I hear an aside, and I want to correct something that was said in this chamber, because it was said in this chamber as it relates to the Grantley Adams International Airport, and I speak of the Grantley Adams International Airport because it is important that we protect our borders and that our ports of entry are given adequate security and protection measures. Senator Franklin, on a previous occasion, came into this chamber and talked about customs officers not having parking at the Grantley Adams International Airport. Sir, that is absolutely not true. And I want to repeat it for you, Mr. President. It is not true. It is not true.
Point of order, Mr. President. He's calling me a liar. That is unparliamentary. He says what I'm saying is absolutely not true. And the thing is, I did not say that. I said they didn't have designated parking. Parking for them, and they have to park among everybody else where their cars. You gotta listen, you know. That voice in your head is schizophrenia. This ain't got nothing to do with you're talking about, you know. You're not listening. And you're misleading the house. You're misleading everybody else. You didn't have your job is to attack me. I didn't get up and say anything, so you decide that you're going to attack me.
Gone beyond the point
I can
of
speak when
order.
we get a chance.
Mr. President, let me repeat. It is not true to say that there is no designated parking for customs officers at the airport. It is simply not true. Sir, in the area of the bus bays at the airport, there is a provision for about 12 parking spaces